Picture a patient in a high-security psychiatric facility. He's incredibly articulate, he's super helpful, and all the experts, he seems completely rehabilitated. I mean, the doctors actually trust him so much that they have him administering psychological tests to the other inmates. But then, the moment he's released, he goes on one of the most horrific crime sprees in American history. So, how exactly does a monster hide in plain sight, completely fooling the very experts trained to spot him? Well, the answer is pretty terrifying. By being the smartest person in the room.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking one of the most disturbing cases of psychological manipulation out there, Edmund Kemper, notoriously known as the co-ed killer. We aren't just recounting a true crime story today. We really want to dig into that profound, chilling disconnect between exceptional intelligence and the capacity for extreme, calculated violence.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is how we're breaking it down today. First, the genius paradox. Second, crafting the social mask. Third, the maternal proxy. And finally, a dark legacy.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the genius paradox. To understand Kemper, you absolutely have to understand his primary weapon, which was his mind.
145. That is the staggering IQ score Kemper clocked during his evaluations at Atascadero State Hospital. To put that into perspective for you, an IQ of 145 puts someone in the 99.9th percentile. This wasn't just some random piece of trivia about him, it's literally the foundation of his whole criminal profile. That level of brain power meant he could deeply understand, navigate, and totally manipulate the exact psychological tests designed to figure out if he was a threat to society.
I mean, just look at this chilling excerpt from his 1972 psychiatric report. The doctor actually wrote that without knowing his history, he'd consider Kemper a very well-adjusted young man. How in the world did he pull that off? Well, while he was locked up for his first murders, which he committed at just 15 years old, he essentially gamed the whole system. Because he was so smart, he was literally trained to give psychiatric tests to fellow inmates. He learned the rubrics. He knew exactly what the doctors needed to hear to check the cured box. His act was so flawless that they permanently expunged his juvenile records and let him walk.
A huge piece of this deception came down to what psychologists call a flat affect. Basically, Kemper's voice was always just remarkably calm, low-pitched, and articulate. Whether he was talking about grabbing a cup of coffee or detailing an absolutely unspeakable act of violence, his tone literally never changed. No rapid breathing, no shifting eyes, no nervous fidgeting. This flat affect created this illusion of total rationality. It showed he had complete control over his narrative, which made the horrific things he was saying so incredibly hard for listeners to actually process emotionally.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Crafting the social mask, disguising pathology. Tricking psychiatrists is one thing, but how do you fool an entire community, including the local cops, while actively committing murders?
Well, Kemper lived this incredibly bizarre double life. On the outside, he was a massive 6 foot 9 inches tall, but he purposefully used that height to come off as awkward and completely non-threatening. He cultivated this sort of dorkish persona. He'd hang out at bars where local police drank, and the officers literally considered him a friendly nuisance or a gentle giant. But internally, he was consumed by these deep, violent, paraphilic compulsions. He actually referred to those dark urges as his fantasy bag. The contrast between the gentle giant sipping beers with the cops and the monster operating in the shadows is just staggering.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound emotional paradox analysts found when they reviewed his interview tapes later on. When Kemper talked about the brutal murder of his own grandparents, he sat perfectly still, completely chill. But when the interview shifted to him talking about a socially awkward bad date he once went on, suddenly he's visibly agitated. His foot is bouncing, he's wringing his hands, he won't make eye contact. His psychological hierarchy was just completely warped. Social failure gave him terrible anxiety, but taking a human life? Absolutely none.
He kept this mask glued on using some incredibly calculated communication tactics. First, there's third-person distancing. He'd narrate his own horrific crimes like he was an objective researcher studying a bug in a lab, entirely shielding himself from the emotional weight of it all. Then he used clinical intellectualization, basically throwing around sophisticated vocabulary to talk about violence, creating a bridge between his smart, normal guy act and his reality as a killer. Finally, he used strategic social cues, a well-timed nod, a little social smile during an interview, not because he actually felt empathy, but just to make absolutely sure his audience was buying his performance.
Which brings us to Section 3, the maternal proxy, victim substitution. Because to really grasp Kemper's case, we have to look beyond how he did it and figure out why he targeted the specific people he did.
The core of this is a concept called victim substitution. Kemper murdered 6 young female college students, but psychologically speaking, they weren't entirely random. They were symbolic stand-ins for his real target, his domineering, emotionally abusive mother, Clarnell. Throughout his whole life, she belittled him, mocked him, and actually locked him in a basement. That intense maternal resentment is what fueled his violence. By targeting young women from the local college community, Kemper was symbolically attacking the mother who tormented him.
You can really see this psychological buildup when you track his timeline. He commits his first murders in 1964. But notice the concentrated co-ed murder spree. That begins in May 1972, right after he's released back into his mother's care. The tension escalates wildly over the next year, leading to multiple victims. And then, look at April 20, 1973. That's the matricide. He finally murders his mother. And just like that, the serial killing spree completely ends.
Those dates, April 20th and 21st, 1973, were the absolute turning point. After a massive argument, Kemper killed his mother to permanently cut off the power she had over him. Then, he invited her friend over and murdered her, just to stage a disappearance. And after that, the compulsion was literally gone. He didn't need the proxy killings anymore. He casually gets in his car, drives all the way to Pueblo, Colorado, picks up a payphone, and calls the cops to confess. And get this, the authorities didn't even believe him at first because his totally calm demeanor didn't fit their idea of a crazed serial killer.
Let's head into our final section, number 4, a dark legacy. How exactly did the justice system respond to an offender they didn't even know existed until he turned himself in?
And this brilliantly illustrates his long-term impact on criminal psychology. After he was convicted and given 8 concurrent life sentences, Kemper did something super unusual. He actually agreed to sit down for massive, extensive interviews with early FBI behavioral scientists. His articulate self-reflection and that exact same clinical detachment he used to protect himself made him a literal textbook case for the brand new field of criminal profiling back in the late 1970s.
The FBI walked away with some invaluable, if entirely grim, takeaways. They learned firsthand that being a genius absolutely does not rule out being violent. If anything, it helps camouflage it. They saw exactly how maternal trauma can act as a massive psychological driver. But the biggest takeaway? Kemper proved that superficial psychiatric assessments are incredibly dangerous. Law enforcement realized that a highly intelligent offender could smoothly function right out in the open, using manipulative behavior to completely hide undetected, murderous intent.
Ed Kemper weaponized his intellect to basically hack the psychiatric and legal systems of his time. He proved that a monster doesn't always look like a movie villain. Sometimes he's the friendly, well-spoken guy buying you a beer at the end of the bar. So it leaves us with this truly unsettling final thought to take away from our explainer today. If the very systems designed to evaluate threats and protect us can be so thoroughly manipulated by pure intellect, how many others remain hidden right now, safely operating behind a mask of sanity?